It's been an all-around pretty good experience, I mean, I'm glad it worked out as well as it has.
After 50 years, 600,000 people walk through Graceland every single year. They file through the front door, they look up at the chandeliers, they stand in the jungle room and take their photos, and they leave thinking they've seen it. They think they know the house. They think they know the man who lived there. But there is a part of Graceland that none of those 600,000 people have ever been shown. A part that the tour guides walk past without a word. A part that sat sealed and silent for 50 years while the rest of the world celebrated, mourned, and mythologized the man whose name is on the gate. And what was found inside that part of the house doesn't just add a footnote to the Elvis Presley story. It rewrites the entire final chapter. Beneath the most visited private home in America, there is a basement. And in that basement, there were documents. Boxes of them. Filing cabinets that hadn't been opened since the 1970s. Envelopes with handwriting on the outside that hadn't been touched since the ink dried. For half a century, while Elvis Presley became the most analyzed, documented, and discussed entertainer in human history, these papers sat in the dark underneath his own floors. Waiting. And the question that should stop you cold isn't just what was in them. The question is why they were down there at all. Graceland is not a humble home. It is a fortress of myth. When Elvis bought it in 1957, he was 22 years old and already the most electrifying force in American music. He paid $100,000 for it at a time when that sum was enough to make headlines. He renovated it obsessively over the years, pouring his personality into every room, every color choice, every piece of furniture. This was not a house he lived in passively. This was a house he shaped and controlled and loved in a way that some people said was the only stable constant in a life that was spinning faster than anyone around him could manage. And yet, beneath that house, beneath the carpet and the chandeliers and the gold records on the wall, there was a room that even Elvis himself reportedly had limited awareness of in terms of what it was being used to store. A room that became, without his knowledge, something far more sinister than a cellar. The discovery didn't happen in a dramatic single moment. It emerged the way so many buried truths do, slowly, during the grinding, unglamorous work of legal proceedings and estate management. In the wake of the lawsuits, the ownership disputes, and the fierce battle that Riley Keough fought to protect her grandfather's estate from people attempting to exploit it, even in the 21st century, representatives working through Graceland's physical property began a more thorough assessment of the estate than had been conducted in decades. This was not a treasure hunt. It was paperwork. It was the kind of exhausting institutional work that happens when an estate worth hundreds of millions of dollars becomes the center of legal conflict. But during that process, in sections of the property that had been functionally ignored for years, boxes were found, cabinets were found, and inside them, documents that predated Elvis's death by years, sitting in the dark like they had been placed there deliberately and then abandoned by whoever put them there. That last detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. These papers weren't destroyed. They weren't shredded, they weren't burned, and they weren't thrown away. They were kept. They were stored carefully enough to survive 50 years in a basement. And that choice, to preserve them but conceal them, is the detail that tells you everything about the intentions of whoever put them there. You don't hide something you intend to let go of forever. You hide something you might need again. Something that has value. Something that, in the wrong hands, or perhaps more accurately the right hands, could be used against you. The contents of those documents began to circulate through the people involved in the estate proceedings with the kind of quiet, controlled urgency that surrounds information too significant to be discussed loudly. And as the picture started to come together, As the dates on the paperwork were cross-referenced, as the signatures were identified, as the financial figures were matched against public records of what Elvis was supposed to have been earning and spending, something became unmistakably clear. These were not routine business records that had simply been forgotten in a basement. These were records of decisions. Decisions made about Elvis Presley, around Elvis Presley, and in several deeply disturbing cases, entirely without the knowledge of Elvis Presley. Decisions that shaped his finances, his contracts, his legacy, and ultimately the inheritance left to his daughter. And on almost every significant page, across dozens of separate documents spanning years of Elvis's life, one name appeared with a frequency that was impossible to ignore. Not Elvis's name, someone else's name. The name of a man Elvis trusted more than almost anyone. A man who built his entire identity around being indispensable to the king of rock and roll. A man who, it now appears, was using that trust as a tool the entire time. The basement of Graceland was never supposed to give up its secrets. But 50 years is a long time to keep a door locked. And now that it's open, there is no putting any of this back. There is a version of the Elvis Presley story that most people know. The boy from Tupelo who changed the world, who sold out arenas, who recorded songs that will outlive every single person alive today. A man at the absolute summit of American fame and American commerce for 2 decades straight. And embedded in that story, almost as a footnote, is the uncomfortable fact that when Elvis died in August of 1977, his estate was in financial ruins. The official explanation was always the same. The spending, the entourage, the excess, the medication, the lifestyle that consumed everything it touched. Elvis, the story goes, simply burned through his own fortune. But the documents found in that basement tell a fundamentally different story. And the difference between those two versions of events is not a matter of perspective or interpretation. It is a matter of paperwork. Cold, dated, signed paperwork that someone worked very hard to make sure no one ever read. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. What emerged from those filing cabinets was not a single smoking gun. It was something more methodical than that, and in many ways more devastating. It was a paper trail. A long, carefully constructed series of financial records, side agreements, and contractual documents that, when laid against each other in sequence, revealed the architecture of something that had been built around Elvis Presley without his full understanding of what was being constructed. The documents spanned years, beginning in the early 1970s when Elvis's commercial power was still enormous and his concert schedule was being ramped up to a pace that should have been generating extraordinary wealth. And what those documents showed was a river of money flowing in from every direction. And then, through a series of arrangements that most people never knew existed, flowing right back out again in ways that had almost nothing to do with Elvis's actual expenses. The name that appeared on the most critical of these documents was Colonel Tom Parker. Most people who know anything about Elvis know the broad outline of Parker's story. The manager who took an almost incomprehensible percentage of Elvis's earnings, who controlled his career with an iron grip, and who made decisions that many historians and music industry insiders have described as catastrophically limiting for an artist of Elvis's magnitude. The refusal to let Elvis tour internationally. The pivot to low-quality films when Elvis desperately wanted to be taken seriously as an actor. The relentless grinding of his client through concert schedules that would have broken almost anyone. These are the known sins of Colonel Tom Parker. But what the basement documents appear to reveal goes so far beyond those known sins that they reframe Parker not simply as a greedy manager, but as a man who was systematically engineering the financial destruction of the very person his entire career depended upon. The side agreements were the most damning category of document. These were arrangements made between Parker and third parties, record labels, merchandising companies, licensing agents, that were structured in ways that benefited Parker's financial interests independently of his official management percentage. In other words, Parker wasn't just taking his cut of what Elvis earned. According to what these documents suggest, he was negotiating deals that generated separate revenue streams flowing directly to Parker's own interests. Streams that Elvis's name and image made possible, but that Elvis himself had no visibility into and reportedly no knowledge of. These weren't commission arrangements. They were parallel financial structures built in the shadow of Elvis's career, using Elvis's commercial power as their fuel while keeping Elvis himself entirely in the dark about their existence. The publishing rights situation adds another layer to this. The loss of Elvis's publishing rights to his early recordings is one of the most well-documented tragedies in music industry history. Elvis signed away rights to songs that would go on to generate hundreds of millions of dollars over the following decades. And the terms under which those rights were transferred have been questioned by music lawyers and entertainment historians for years. The basement documents include correspondence and agreements that shed new light on how those arrangements were structured, who was advising Elvis at the time, and whether the counsel he received was genuinely in his interest or in the interest of people positioned to benefit from his ignorance. The picture that emerges is not of a naive young artist making uninformed mistakes. It is of a young artist being deliberately kept uninformed by people whose financial interests required his ignorance. And here is the detail that makes all of this almost unbearable to sit with. Elvis was performing punishing concert schedules in his final years, 200 shows a year at his peak, playing cities one after another in a cycle that people who were there described as visibly destroying him. He was doing this because he was told he needed to. Because his people told him the finances required it. Because the message being delivered to him consistently and from multiple directions was that the money wasn't there. That he had to keep working. That there was no choice. But according to the documents found in that basement, the money was there. It was being generated in enormous quantities. It was simply being redirected, layered through agreements he hadn't fully seen, and funneled into arrangements that served everyone in his orbit except the man whose name was on every marquee and every ticket. He was being run into the ground to fill a gap that didn't actually exist. And the receipts for exactly how that was done were sitting in a filing cabinet beneath his own home the entire time. But the financial documents, as devastating as they are, were not the only thing found in those boxes. Because mixed in among the contracts and the ledgers and the side agreements, there were personal papers, notes, letters, pages written in a hand that those close to the estate recognized immediately. And what those pages revealed was something that reframes everything. Because it turns out that Elvis wasn't completely in the dark. He knew something was wrong. He just couldn't prove it. And now, finally, he can. There is something uniquely cruel about discovering that a person knew they were being betrayed, but couldn't find a way to stop it. That the trap was closing, and they could feel the walls moving, and yet every direction they turned, there was someone blocking the exit. That is the portrait that emerges from the personal documents found in that basement. Not Elvis, the oblivious superstar, too consumed by fame and excess to notice what was happening around him. But Elvis the man, sharp enough to sense the betrayal, isolated enough that sensing it changed nothing, and desperate enough that he started writing things down. Because writing was the only place left where he could tell the truth without someone intercepting it. The notes are not dramatic confessions. They are not the kind of thing that reads like a thriller. They are something far more painful than that. They are the quiet, almost private observations of a man who is doing the math and finding that the numbers don't add up, and who is beginning to understand, slowly and then all at once, that the people responsible for making the numbers add up are the same people who have the most to gain from making sure they never do. In one set of pages, Elvis wrote with striking clarity about his financial confusion, about being told one figure by his accountants and then seeing something different reflected in his actual circumstances. He wasn't raging. He wasn't accusatory in the way someone who has hard evidence might be. He was asking questions on paper the way a person asks questions when they already suspect the answer, but are still hoping they're wrong. He was hoping he was wrong about the people he had built his entire world around. The Memphis Mafia dynamic is impossible to separate from this part of the story. The men in Elvis's inner circle, the friends, the bodyguards, the childhood companions who traveled with him and lived at Graceland and filled the rooms of every hotel suite he ever occupied, are often discussed in terms of their loyalty to him. And many of them did love Elvis with genuine ferocity. But love and honesty are not always the same thing. And the basement documents make clear that at least some members of that inner circle were aware that something was financially wrong and chose, for reasons that are not difficult to understand, to say nothing. Because speaking up meant losing the salaries, the cars, the houses, the entire lifestyle that Parker's machine was funding for everyone in its orbit. The system that was exploiting Elvis was also feeding everyone around him. And that made the silence almost universal. This is the mechanism that made the betrayal so airtight. Elvis was surrounded by people who depended financially on the very structure that was destroying him. Every time he raised a concern, there was someone nearby to reassure him. Every time he started asking harder questions, there was a distraction available, a show to prepare for, a medication to take, a crisis somewhere else that needed his attention more urgently than the balance sheet. The documents suggest that this management of Elvis's curiosity was not accidental. It was practiced. It was deliberate. The people who needed him not to look too closely had become very skilled at making sure he never looked long enough to see the full picture. And then there is Lisa Marie. Because the cruelest downstream consequence of everything captured in those basement documents is what Elvis's daughter inherited, or more precisely, what she didn't. When Elvis died at 42, the estate that should have reflected 20 years of unparalleled commercial dominance was instead encumbered with debt, stripped of its most valuable publishing assets, and worth a fraction of what honest management would have produced. Lisa Marie was 9 years old. She inherited a name, a house, and a financial situation that would take decades of legal work and careful stewardship to even begin to stabilize. She spent years of her adult life trying to untangle the web of decisions that had been made about her father's money before she was even old enough to understand what money meant. She hired lawyers and financial advisors and fought legal battles that stretched across decades, always working backward toward a truth that, it now appears, more than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue.
Welcome to Filmstock FX channel.
Lisa Marie Presley was 9 years old when her father died. 9 years old. And she didn't just lose him the way a child loses a parent to illness or accident. She lost him inside the house she lived in. On a floor she walked every day. In a room she passed every morning on her way to her own bedroom. Most children who lose a parent are separated from the place of that loss. They grieve at a distance. Lisa Marie had to keep living inside it. She had to keep walking that hallway, passing that bathroom door, existing in the same physical space where the most catastrophic moment of her young life had occurred. And then, when she was old enough to understand what the world had built around her father's name, she had to decide what to do with all of it. At age 25, under the terms of Elvis's will, Lisa Marie Presley inherited the entirety of the Graceland estate. What she received was not the gleaming gold record-lined monument to American success that the public imagined. What she received was a property hemorrhaging money, a father's name attached to a brand that had been mismanaged into near bankruptcy, and a collection of rooms upstairs that no estate lawyer or financial advisor could assign a dollar value to, because their value wasn't financial. It was entirely, devastatingly personal. The people around her told her the hard truth quickly. To survive, to keep Graceland, to honor her father's name in any meaningful way, she would have to commercialize it. She would have to open the doors and sell the experience and build the enterprise. And she did. She sold 85% of Elvis Presley Enterprises and watched the operation transform into the commercial giant it is today, complete with the hotel complex and the arena and the gift shops and the hot sauce. But she kept one thing for herself. She drew the line at the top of the staircase, and she held it there, year after year, regardless of what the balance sheet said or what the business advisors recommended. And the reason she held that line becomes painfully clear when you understand what the years between inheriting Graceland and losing Graceland actually looked like for Lisa Marie Presley. By 2018, the financial reality of her life had become a crisis that shocked even the people who thought they knew her situation. Reports emerged that Lisa Marie had lost nearly all of the $100 million she had received from the sale of Elvis Presley Enterprises. The money had moved through failed business ventures, personal expenses, and, according to her own legal filings, the catastrophic mismanagement by people she had trusted. She was, by multiple documented accounts, carrying millions of dollars in debt. Graceland was her last significant asset. And in the conversations that followed, the urgent, uncomfortable conversations about how to stabilize her financial situation, the upstairs came up. It had to. If you're looking at Graceland as a revenue source and you're running out of options, eventually someone in that room points at the one part of the property nobody has ever been allowed to monetize and asks the obvious question. Lisa Marie's answer was no. Reportedly, clearly, and without significant deliberation, no. And what makes that answer remarkable isn't the financial sacrifice it represented, though that sacrifice was real. What makes it remarkable is the reason behind it. Because upstairs wasn't just where her father died. Upstairs was where she remembered him alive. Her bedroom was up there. The room where Elvis would come and sit on the edge of her bed and talk to her in the middle of the night. Because he kept the same hours she was supposed to be sleeping through. The hallway was up there where she would hear his voice and follow the sound of it and find him in some room or another, restless and luminous and entirely hers in those private hours before the world woke up and claimed him again. To open those rooms to strangers, to people with ticket stubs and smartphone cameras who wanted a piece of the king, would have been, to Lisa Marie, an act of desecration so profound she couldn't frame it any other way. She had spent her entire life watching the world consume her father, watching his image get stretched across merchandise and movies and tribute concerts and tabloid headlines until the actual human being she had known, the man who sat on the edge of her bed, the man who smelled like a specific cologne she never forgot, the man who was funny and frightened and larger than life and completely lost all at the same time, was buried so deep under the legend that even she sometimes had to fight to remember him clearly. The upstairs was the one place the legend hadn't fully reached. It was the one place where he was still just her father. And she was not going to sell that. Not for any amount of money. Not under any circumstances. And then, on January 12th, 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died of a small bowel obstruction at the age of 54. She was buried in the meditation garden at Graceland, beside her father, beside her son Benjamin, who had taken his own life in 2020 at age 27. The woman who had spent 3 decades standing guard at the top of that staircase, who had absorbed every financial crisis and every outside pressure and every well-meaning suggestion that the rooms could be opened tastefully, respectfully, carefully, was gone. The key she had been holding for 30 years was now in someone else's hands. And the question of what that someone else would do with it was about to become one of the most emotionally charged decisions in the history of American music. When Lisa Marie Presley died, the legal machinery that surrounds a estate of that magnitude moved quickly and brutally. What followed was not a quiet, dignified transfer of responsibility from mother to daughter. What followed was a public legal battle that exposed just how contested, how complicated, and how emotionally raw the question of Graceland's future truly was. At the center of that battle stood two women from the same bloodline, carrying the same grief and seeing the future of Elvis Presley's home in two completely different ways. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's ex-wife, Lisa Marie's mother, and the woman who had arguably done more than anyone alive to build the Graceland empire into what it is today, emerged to contest the terms of the estate trust. Her position, legally speaking, centered on amendments to the trust document that she argued had been made without proper authorization, was sitting in a filing cabinet under Graceland the entire time. Lisa Marie Presley died in January of 2023. She was 54 years old, and the full picture of what those basement documents contain, the complete accounting of how her father's wealth was engineered away from him and therefore away from her, may be something she never fully saw. That is not a footnote. That is a tragedy layered on top of a tragedy. A second generation paying the price for a betrayal that the first generation never got justice for. What makes the personal documents so significant is precisely that they are personal. Financial records can be explained away, recontextualized, argued over by competing teams of lawyers with competing interpretations. But a man's own handwriting, his own words, his own private articulation of doubt and suspicion, and the particular exhaustion of someone who senses they are being lied to but cannot yet prove it, that is not something that can be easily dismissed. That is Elvis Presley, in the quietest possible voice, telling the truth. And the fact that those pages ended up in a basement rather than in a courtroom or a congressional hearing or a front page story says everything about the power of the people who needed that truth to stay buried. He knew. He wrote it down, and someone made sure it disappeared beneath his own floor. But here is what that someone apparently never accounted for. Buildings get renovated. Estates get litigated. Basements get opened. And 50 years, it turns out, is not actually forever. This is why the modern Graceland controversies matter so much as context for what was found in that basement. In 2024, Graceland became the center of a jaw-dropping legal battle when a fraudulent company attempted to foreclose on the property using documents that were later determined to be fabricated. Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter and Lisa Marie's daughter, fought back ferociously and successfully protected the estate. But that battle exposed something important. It exposed the fact that Graceland, even now, even half a century after Elvis's death, remains a target. That there are people who look at that property and see not a legacy to be honored, but an asset to be captured. And when you understand that dynamic in the present tense, it becomes much easier to understand how the same dynamic operated in the 1970s, when Elvis was alive but weakening, and the people around him were already positioning themselves for what came after. The Colonel Tom Parker revelation that emerged through court proceedings after his death added a dimension to this story that still feels almost too strange to be real. Parker, it turned out, was not even who he claimed to be. Born Andreas Cornelis van Kwijk in the Netherlands, he had entered the United States illegally and spent his entire American life operating under a constructed identity. He couldn't obtain a passport, which is a significant reason he kept Elvis from touring internationally. Tours that would have generated extraordinary revenue and artistically revitalized a man who desperately needed both. Parker's need to protect his own secret directly shaped and limited Elvis's career in ways that cost Elvis tens of millions of dollars and cost the world performances that never happened. Land was supposed to be his sanctuary, the one place in the world that was entirely his. And it turns out that even there, even in the house he loved more than anywhere on earth, the betrayal had followed him all the way down to the foundation. 50 years, those papers sat in the dark. And now that they're in the light, the Elvis Presley story will never be told the same way again. If this story hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment and tell me what shocked you the most. Subscribe if you're not already here, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than one video can hold. And share this, because Elvis deserved the truth. And so do you.